My name's Kelly McKellar-Nathan and I am a Kunja descendant. My grandfather Mckella was a Kunja man. My grandmother Mckella was a Cooma woman, but I grew up on Kunja country, so that's who I identify with. I grew up in Cunnamulla. I spent early childhood in Cunnamulla, and then Dad had his teaching positions in Brisbane. So we spent every school holiday in Cunnamulla. I had a really strong cultural upbringing, and being in Cunnamulla meant being around family and being on country, which kind of just was a fun time for me. My own opinion for young people today is they struggle with their self-identity because they have no connection to their country or where they come from. I was fortunate to have that, which, you know, like I said, had a huge impact on me because I knew exactly who I was, where I came from, and I was more than comfortable and confident in who that was. My love for sport has been with me for as long as I can remember. We've, you know, always played some kind of game as kids when we were growing up. For me to pursue sport as a career was a really strong desire of mine, and as a kid I tried all different kinds of sports. So there was athletics, tennis, softball, touch. I had a really strong passion for both athletics and softball, but there was a point in my career that I had to make a decision between the two. I was a sprinter, so I used to run 1, 2 and 400. The 400 metres started to become my key event, and my training partner and competitor was Kathy Freeman. So we had run a few tournaments together, and we were selected to go on a training kind of competition tour through the USA. But I had also been selected in the Australian Under-19 Youth World Series team, and at that time I thought, you know, wearing the green and gold was a lot more important. Making that decision to represent Australia would not have happened without my family. You know, I look back on it now and I do wonder if I'd stayed with athletics, where that could have taken me. But the choice between softball was that team environment, the camaraderie-ship. And it was just a lot more enjoyable than an individual sport like athletics. My dad's a primary school teacher, and he's always instilled in us that education is more important than any kind of sporting career. So he, having that strong education background, made sure that I evenly balanced my education commitments with my sporting commitments. So I guess by the age of 16 I'd represented Queensland in 2 sports, athletics and softball. From there I went on to represent Open Women, and it was a beautiful year the very first 12 months. I'd played so well at nationals that I earned a spot in the Australian women's team that travelled to China for the Challenger Cup. So I was fortunate enough to represent Australia in China. That would have been June, I think, in that year. I came back in October of the same year and missed out on selection in the Open Women's team. So I'd gone from like the pinnacle of my sport to, you know, the lowest point that you possibly could. At that time I'd been offered a university scholarship, and I thought, well, I'll take a bit of a break from representative softball, and was headed on a plane for Oklahoma City as a 19-year-old. So, I mean, at the time I was quite excited about it, but I didn't realise what that meant until I got inside the dorm and started unpacking. But, you know, it was thousands and thousands of miles from family, friends, basically the life I knew. The cultures were very different. And I think what I loved most about softball was the opportunity to travel to different countries and experience that culture. So it also gave me an opportunity to, educate people about Aboriginal people in general, but specifically more about my people, where we come from. My story is a little bit different to everybody else. I'd basically trained for 4 years, probably about 25 to 30 hours a week. And with softball, we're somewhat government funded to support that training and competition. But basically I had to work full time to be able to support myself. That 4 years was a build up to the Sydney Olympics, and I actually remember the day as if it happened yesterday. So the team was getting announced and we were getting letters that particular day, and I remember it just said, "I regret to inform you," and couldn't tell you what the rest of the letter says because it's just like constant shock. The last 4 years have been not like a waste, but it was difficult. In all honesty, it probably took me about 12 to 18 months to, get through that. So I'd felt like, I'd travelled all through Queensland and Australia by this time, promoting softball to Aboriginal communities, particularly in remote areas. And they all, I guess, part of the profile of me going to those communities was current Australian player going for the Olympics and being an Aboriginal person. So for a while there it was a struggle because I'd felt like I'd let down all those children, all those Aboriginal people that I'd visited, kind of shared my story with. I felt like they were a key part of who would be disappointed as well. I think sport is very important, particularly for Aboriginal people. One, we're naturally talented. It's an avenue where they can express that skill and that talent. And, in generally, it's a way for people to be active. It's an opportunity to kind of release any kind of stresses. So it's just a little break where we're doing some kind of activity, but with people that we enjoy being around. It teaches you social interaction. It does drop down boundaries. So even though there were a couple of times that I felt quite anxious about being Aboriginal and the only one in a particular team, the lessons I learned in sport made me more confident as a person to be able to respond to anything. So it builds confidence, it builds self-esteem. Most teams that I'd played in, I was the only Aboriginal player, and I can probably say there's probably once or twice that I had experienced some form of racism. I mean, I can't speak for Adam Goods or those higher profile athletes, but what I do know about them is that they are the face of Aboriginal Australia, and they, other than their playing career, they do a lot behind the scenes that people just don't see. Then there's people like me that don't have the profile that do exactly the same thing. There's just as much importance for them making that impact as there is for the kids to receive it.